The first thing I noticed about Dante Salvator was not his face. It was the sound. A soft metallic click from somewhere near the door, neat and quiet and terrible in the way a priest might clear his throat before announcing bad news. The whole restaurant seemed to hear it. Forks paused in the air. A man near the window set down his wineglass so carefully it made no sound at all. Even the espresso machine, which had been hissing all night like it rescented the world, seemed suddenly too loud for the room. I was carrying a tray with 2 coffees and a plate of almond biscuits. It was nearly midnight. My feet hurt. My shift should have ended an hour earlier, but Mrs. Rossi's son had called in sick again, and if I wanted next week's rent paid, I stayed. That was how my life worked. I stayed. I smiled. I kept my head down and let louder people ruin each other somewhere above me. Then the front door opened and the air changed. Not because Dante Salvator stormed in. He didn't. Men like that never had to rush. He walked through the room in a dark coat, still holding the cold of outside, flanked by 2 men I recognized only because people in Little Palermo learned to recognize danger early or not at all. One of them was broad-shouldered and grim. The other had the face of someone who smiled only when other people were bleeding. Dante wasn't smiling. He moved through the restaurant with a kind of stillness that made everyone else seem clumsy. No raised voice, no threats, nothing theatrical. Just a man approaching table 7, where a bookmaker named Rizzo had stopped pretending his luck was bad and started pretending stolen money was difficult to find. "Stand up," Dante said. That was all. Rizzo tried to laugh. Nobody joined him. I was halfway between the kitchen and the dining room when the first chair scraped back. The tray in my hands trembled once. I tightened my grip until the porcelain stopped rattling. I had spent most of my life learning how to hold breakable things steady. Rizzo stood. A second later, one of Dante's men drove him face first into the table. Wine tipped, glass shattered, someone gasped. Dante did not move until Rizzo was dragged upright again, blood already running from his nose onto the white cloth. "Where is my money?" Rizzo mumbled something brave and stupid. Dante listened with the patience of a man who had heard every lie worth hearing. Then he held out his hand. The broad one gave him a folded paper. Dante glanced at it, then at Rizzo. "You borrowed from my uncle. You stole from me. You lied in my house. Pick which insult you want me to answer first." I should have gone back to the kitchen. Any sensible person would have. Instead, I stood there because Mrs. Rossi was frozen near the till, because hot coffee was sliding toward the edge of my tray, because there are moments when the body stops being sensible and becomes useful. Rizzo lunged. It happened badly for him. Dante caught his wrist, turned once, and put him down with an efficiency so clean it frightened me more than shouting would have. There was no rage in it, no performance. Only decision. Rizzo hit the floor hard enough to rattle the cutlery. One of the coffee cups slipped on my tray and tipped, dark liquid splashing over my knuckles. I sucked in a breath. Dante turned at the sound. For a second his gaze landed on me the way a blade lands on a table, flat, deliberate, cold enough to leave a mark anyway. He looked at the tray, my burned hand, my face. Then the apron, the name tag, the fact that I had not screamed. "Your waitress is bleeding," one of the customers whispered to no one. I was, not really, just pink from the coffee. But Dante's eyes dropped to his own right hand, where Rizzo's blood had striped across his knuckles. Nobody moved. I don't know why I did what I did. Maybe because someone had to. Maybe because blood on skin always looked more human than it had any right to. Maybe because when I was a child, the nuns used to say kindness was easiest when it was stupid. I set the tray down on the nearest empty table. From my apron pocket, I took a clean linen napkin, folded it once, then once again. I walked the 3 steps to him while every person in the room forgot how to breathe, and I touched the cloth to his hand. His men reacted instantly. One moved. Dante stopped him with the smallest turn of his wrist. I dabbed carefully at the blood across his knuckles, not scrubbing, not shaking. Just cleaning the mess because it was there and because I knew how. His skin was warm. His hand was impossibly still. When I looked up, his face had changed, not softened, something worse. Something startled. "No one taught you fear?" he asked quietly. I swallowed, not in a way that made it useful. A sound moved through the room that might have been somebody's breath catching. Dante's gaze stayed on me. He had gray eyes, I realized. Not silver, not blue, the color of church ash after rain. "What's your name?" "Elena," he waited. The restaurant felt suddenly made of glass. "Elena Belandi." The napkin stopped in my hand. Dante did not blink. Behind him, one of his men swore under his breath. Rizzo, forgotten on the floor, made a broken noise. The room had not gone quieter, it had gone deaf. Dante took the napkin from my hand as if he'd nearly forgotten it was there. "Say it again." "Belandi." He looked at me for a long time. I wished, stupidly, that I had lied. But my father had taught me two things before he died: how to temper sugar, and how to keep my own name clean in my mouth even when the world wanted to dirty it. So I stood there with coffee drying on my skin, and let the most dangerous man in the city examine my face like he was reading a letter he had once burned, and somehow found again. "Who was your father?" he asked. "Matteo." The broad-shouldered man near him went rigid. Dante's expression did not change at all, which was worse, much worse. He looked at Mrs. Rossi. "She's done for the night." Mrs. Rossi nodded too fast. "I have to close out," I said before my brain could stop me. His eyes returned to mine. "Do you?" I should have apologized. I should have taken back the words. Instead, I heard my own voice, thin and strange. "People usually like to be paid for working." Something almost alive moved at the corner of his mouth. Not humor. Recognition, maybe, or warning. "Then close out," he said. "You're coming with me." My heart thudded once, hard enough to hurt. "I'm not." That almost smile disappeared completely. Behind him, Rizzo groaned on the floor. Dante did not look away from me. "Little shadow," he said, the words low and cold. That was not a negotiation. I had spent my whole life avoiding scenes, avoiding notice, avoiding any moment that might split my life into a before and after. But some doors did not care what you wanted. I closed out my till with hands that had started shaking too late to matter. Mrs. Rossi cried quietly while pretending to count receipts. No one tried to help me. I didn't blame them. In neighborhoods like ours, survival was rarely noble. When I reached the door, Dante held it open. The winter air hit my face. One of his black cars waited at the curb like a verdict. Dante stood beside it with the city dark around him, and that silver lighter turning once between his fingers. Click, close, click. My name still felt wrong in the night. Too loud, too alive. I stopped at the curb. "If this is about my father, I don't know anything." "I know," he said. That scared me more than if he'd called me a liar. "Then why am I going with you?" For the first time, something old and ugly flickered behind his eyes. Not anger, memory. "Because," he said, opening the car door, "now that I've heard your last name, everyone else will come looking too." I got in anyway. The lock turned. The house was not what I expected. I had imagined something vulgar. Gold rails, velvet curtains, portraits of dead men pointing at each other from opposite walls. Instead, the Salvator estate felt restrained in a way that made luxury seem meaner. Pale stone, dark wood, long hallways built to carry footsteps without echo. The kind of house where every object had chosen to be expensive quietly. I noticed the doors first. They were heavy enough to matter. A woman in black opened one for me without meeting my eyes. "Guest room," she said, then left before I could ask whether guest was the right word for someone brought in under armed escort. The room itself was larger than the entire apartment I rented over the florist on Mott Street. White walls, a bed like an accusation, thick curtains pulled over the windows. On the dresser sat a glass carafe of water and a folded set of clothes in cream-colored cotton. No bars on the window. I checked anyway. The glass didn't open far enough for a body. I should say I was brave. I was angry in the particular exhausted way poor people get angry, quietly, because loud anger is a luxury for people who expect to survive it. So I took off my shoes, sat on the edge of the bed, and counted my breathing until the room stopped tilting. My father had died when I was 8. After that came St. Agnes home for girls, then 2 foster families, then a one-room apartment I bought for myself with overtime and stubbornness. People heard the word orphan and imagined something poetic. They never pictured the actual things: the cheap detergent, the constant being looked over, the knowledge that if you made yourself useful enough, people called it gratitude instead of desperation. A knock came at the door. Before I could answer, it opened. Dante stepped inside as if he owned the air around him, which, in this house, he probably did. He had removed his coat. Without it, he looked leaner, harder, as though the fabric had only hidden the fact that violence lived close to his skin. His sleeves were rolled once. His right hand was clean now. I thought about the napkin and hated myself for thinking about it. "You have 10 minutes, he said. "Then you eat. I'm not hungry." That wasn't a question either. My spine straightened before I could help it. Am I under arrest? No. Am I a prisoner? His gaze moved to the door behind him. There was a beat too long before he said, "You're under my protection." That sounds expensive. It is. I almost laughed, which felt inappropriate under the circumstances. Then maybe return me. He came farther into the room, not close enough to touch. Close enough that I could smell cold air still caught in his shirt, layered with something darker, cedar and smoke, and the metallic edge of night. "Your father vanished 12 years ago. 3 men have killed for the Belandi name since then. Tonight, 2 of them learned you exist." I stared at him. "I'm a waitress." "You were." There it was, the easy theft of ordinary life. He said it like fact because men like him had the power to make grammar obey them. "I need to call work. They've been told you're ill. My landlord paid." That made me angrier than anything else. "I didn't ask you to do that." "No," he said, "you rarely ask at all." I noticed. I did not know why that unsettled me. Maybe because it meant he had been watching more closely than I wanted. Maybe because he said it without admiration, like he was identifying a fracture line in glass. Before I could answer, the door opened wider, and a giant of a man entered balancing a tray so delicately it looked like satire. He was broad as a wardrobe, with kind dark eyes and the solemn expression of someone carrying sacred objects. The tray held soup, bread, a small plate of olives, and strangely, a single untouched cantaloupe. "This," he announced to the room at large, "is attempted murder." Dante closed his eyes briefly. "Tommaso, boss, I say this with respect and a strong desire to live." Maria put pastry on my tray again. Tommaso lowered the tray onto the side table and pointed accusingly at the cantaloupe. "She knows I'm avoiding refined flour. She wants my funeral to be open casket and puffy." Against my will, I looked from him to the pastry and back. "You could just not eat it." He stared at me with real pain. "Signorina, you are new here, so I forgive the cruelty. But if Maria Conti puts a cantaloupe in front of a man, refusing it is like spitting on the Madonna." From somewhere in the hall, a woman's voice called, "Then die beautiful." "Tommy," Tommaso's eyes closed. "You hear, this is how she courts me, through violence." Dante's mouth shifted in a way I realized, with actual surprise, was the beginning of amusement. "Leave the tray. I leave my dignity every day in this house," Tommaso muttered. Then to me, with a hand over his heart, "If anyone asks, tell them I fought bravely against cream filling." When he left, the room felt smaller. I looked at Dante. "You let him talk to you like that? Tommaso has been shot twice for me," he said. "I permit carbohydrates." That should not have made me smile. It almost did. I covered it by reaching for the soup spoon. My hands were steadier now. Dante noticed, of course. He seemed to notice everything I wanted hidden and nothing I was prepared to say. He stood near the window while I ate, not watching me. Watching the dark beyond the curtains as if the house had secrets, he was trying to hear more clearly than the rest of us could. I hated that I was grateful for the food. I hated more that it was good. Real broth, fresh bread, olive oil that tasted peppery and expensive. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "The truth. I already told you. I don't know anything about my father except that he made perfect sfogliatelle and died before paying off his debts." Dante turned then. "Your father didn't die in debt. It took a second for the words to find shape. What? He died hiding. The spoon lowered in my hand. You seem very certain for a man I met an hour ago. I knew Matteo Belandi before you learned to read. That made my heartbeat stumble. My father had been so careful with his past that even his silences felt locked. He never said names, never said places. Only recipes, warnings, and once, when fever made him careless, a sentence I had never forgotten. If anyone powerful asks who you are, be smaller than the room. I set the spoon down. Then start talking. Dante's jaw tightened. Not yet. Because you don't trust me. His answer came too fast. Because you shouldn't trust me. That landed somewhere I wasn't ready to examine. When he moved toward the door, I said, if this is protection, why does the lock turn from the outside? His hand paused on the knob. Because there are men in this city who would cut through my front gate to get to you. That isn't what I asked. For the first time since I'd met him, his control showed a seam. When he looked back, his face was calm again, but only on the surface. Eat, little shadow, sleep while the house is quiet. Then he left. A second later, I heard it. The lock turned. Morning in the Salvator house sounded like restraint, muted footsteps, low voices in Italian, a door closing softly somewhere far off. The hum of security systems I could not see, and the occasional clink of china carried down from another floor. No one shouted. No television blared. It was the silence of people trained to make room for one man's concentration. I woke before dawn because unfamiliar beds always made me suspicious. For a full minute, I forgot where I was. Then I saw the heavy curtains, the 2 white sheets, and the folded black dress someone had laid across the chair overnight, and memory came back in a rush sharp enough to burn. By 8, I had given up pretending sleep would return. I showered in a bathroom bigger than St. Agnes's chapel and dressed in the black wool dress because it fit and because refusing clothes would not restore my life. When I opened the door, it was unlocked. That unsettled me more than if it had still been locked. I followed the smell before I followed the house. Coffee, warm bread, and the faint bitter sweetness of orange peel heating in sugar. The kitchen sat at the back of the first floor, large enough to feed a wedding and clean enough to intimidate a hospital. Copper pans hung over the island. Sunlight came through tall windows, over a stone courtyard, gone white with frost. At the center of it all stood Maria Conti, who looked like every formidable Italian woman I had ever feared on sight and loved an hour later. Silver hair in a knot, black dress, apron tied like armor. She glanced up once, assessed me, and pointed to the espresso machine. You know how? Yes. Good, Tommy cries less when he's caffeinated. I almost smiled. Does he cry often? Only when I threaten his diet or his feelings. Today, both. That was how I met Maria, who decided I was useful before she decided whether I was welcome. By 10, I had learned 2 things. First, that there were always armed men somewhere just outside my line of sight. Second, that useful hands got more freedom than frightened ones. Maria did not ask questions while I worked beside her. She only corrected my grip on the pastry bag once and nodded, almost imperceptibly. When I fixed the texture on a lemon cream she said had gone grainy. You've worked pastry, she said. My father taught me. Nothing else. But in that small sound lived approval, and I was more starved for it than I wanted to admit. Tommaso appeared mid-morning in a charcoal suit, stretched broad across his shoulders, carrying 3 folders and the expression of a man publicly betrayed by carbohydrates. Maria, he said mournfully, why is there honey in my yogurt? Because you are joyless. I could be joyless and lean, she sniffed. Impossible. Your face needs softness. Tommaso saw me at the counter zesting an orange over sugar. He brightened instantly. Ah. The boss's mystery guest. I have a name. So does the gallbladder, but no one brings it flowers. He leaned an elbow on the marble. Tommaso Rixai. Driver, logistics, occasional hostage to this woman's kitchen. If Maria offers you cannoli, it means she loves you. If she offers you soup, you are dying. Maria smacked the back of his hand with a wooden spoon. He winced theatrically and looked at me as if to confirm his suffering for the court record. I laughed then. A quick, disobedient sound. It felt strange in this house. Tommaso's whole face softened at the sound, as if laughter itself were rare enough here to be fed. He glanced toward the doorway and straightened. Everyone in the kitchen felt it a second before I turned. The air shifted. A silence moved outward. Dante stood there. He did not say anything. He only watched me for a beat too long. My hands, already sticky with orange sugar, seemed suddenly clumsy. The zest knife rested against the cutting board. Sunlight caught the faint scar near his left temple. His gray gaze dropped to the bowl in front of me. "What is that?" he asked. "Candied peel." I heard myself add because nerves made me talk too much. "For a dessert Maria didn't ask me to improve." Maria snorted. Dante walked in. Tommaso vanished with his folders at a speed that suggested instinct preserved men longer than loyalty did. Dante came to stand across the island from me, his palms resting lightly on the marble. On his right hand, if I looked too closely, I could still imagine yesterday's blood. "You cook?" he asked. "Bake. That wasn't in the file." I looked up sharply. "I have a file. Everyone does. That's deeply comforting." His mouth flattened, almost suppressing something. "Show me." I should have refused on principle. Instead, I reached for a pan, because kitchens were the only places where my hands knew exactly who they were. I poured the caramel, folded in bitter chocolate, blood orange cream, a layer of crisp sugar on top. Maria watched from the stove without interfering. Dante stayed where he was, close enough that I noticed his hands. Broad, controlled, a faint nick near one knuckle, no rings except a signet in black gold. When I torched the sugar, the top blistered, darkened, glassed over. "What do you call it?" he asked. I hesitated. "Not everything has to be named." "In my world," Dante said, "everything does." I met his eyes over the small blue flame. "Then call it whatever breaks first." For one strange second, nothing in the room moved. Maria cleared her throat with the force of a sermon. I set the torch down too quickly. Dante's gaze dropped to my fingers. A thin line of red had appeared where the edge of sponge sugar had caught my skin. He came around the island before I could hide it. I should have stepped back. I did not. He took my wrist with astonishing care for a man I had seen put another one on the floor. His thumb braced the pulse point once, firm and warm. He studied the cut, then reached for a clean towel. The almost of it was unbearable. His fingers were against the inside of my wrist. My body understood something before my mind had finished objecting. Then he wrapped the towel over the cut and let go. "That should have hurt," he said. "It did. You didn't flinch." The words landed differently from anyone else saying them might have. Before I could ask why, a phone buzzed somewhere in his jacket. He checked it and the temperature in the room dropped. Not visibly. Not to anyone who didn't already know how to watch for weather in faces. Maria saw it. "So did I. What happened?" I asked. Dante tucked the phone away. "A florist on Mott Street burned an hour ago." My throat closed. "That's my building," he nodded once. "You're not going back." I gripped the counter to stay still. "Was anyone hurt?" "Not yet. Not yet, because in his world damage unfolded in stages." He looked at the dessert I'd made, then at me. "Keep her inside," he said to Maria. Her answer was immediate. "Of course." He turned to leave. At the doorway, he paused. For the first time since I'd arrived, I understood something with perfect clarity. This house was not the center of his power. He was. And somewhere beyond its walls, someone had already decided to test what I was worth. Dante did not believe in signs. Men who survived long enough to lead rarely did. But when he had heard Belandi in that restaurant, it had felt less like memory and more like a trap springing closed around an old grave. Matteo Belandi was supposed to be dead, and with him, the Legger Vittorio had hunted for 12 years. Yet the daughter baked blood orange into burnt sugar exactly the way Dante's mother used to on feast days, and when she cut her hand, she looked at pain as if it were simply another task to finish. He should have sent her away under another name before dawn. Instead, he posted 6 more men at the gate and ordered Carlo to lock down the south wall. That was his first mistake. Someone was already moving against us. The house had a chapel, Of course it did. I found it by accident just before sunset, after a day spent trying not to feel the shape of my old life closing behind me. Maria kept me busy. Giulia Ferrante, the house doctor, came to look at the sugar cut on my finger and left after deciding I was not dying. Two men I had never met watched the hall without pretending not to. By evening, the walls felt too expensive to breathe inside, so I walked. The chapel sat behind the east garden, separate from the main house by a covered stone path slick with winter damp. It was smaller than I expected. Old brick, narrow windows, a bell tower no taller than the cypress trees around it. The door gave under my hand with surprising ease. Inside, it smelled of cold stone, wax, and old incense, like every church I had ever entered only when I had nowhere else to stand. The altar was plain. The pews were dark and polished from hands, knees, grief. A bank of votive candles glowed near a side statue of the Madonna, and their tiny flames made the whole room feel like it was breathing shallowly. I stood there longer than I meant to. In orphanages, chapels were never about God first. They were about quiet, about being given a bench and a reason not to speak for a while, St. Agnes had a chapel with cracked blue paint and a leaking roof over the last row. When rain came through, the nuns moved the candles and called it a test. I used to sit under the leak and pretend somebody somewhere might still be looking for me. The side door clicked shut behind me. I turned too fast. Dante stood just inside the entrance, one hand still on the handle, the other turning that silver lighter once across his fingers. Click, close, click. He was wearing a dark coat this time, the collar open at the throat, cold air still clinging to him. The chapel seemed to notice him the way the restaurant had, by becoming tighter around the edges. "You keep finding locked places," I said. "They keep being places you shouldn't be alone." I faced the candles again because looking at him directly felt like volunteering for trouble. The door wasn't locked. Not yet. He moved farther inside. His footsteps made almost no sound. That was another terrible thing about him. Men like Dante should have arrived loudly enough to prepare for. He never did. "You have a chapel," I said, because my nerves made me say unnecessary things. "I have a mother who believed God listened more carefully if the floors were imported from Florence." Despite myself, I glanced down at the veined marble beneath my shoes. "Did he?" "No." The answer came flat and immediate, not bitter, certain. I turned then. His face hadn't changed, but something in the set of his shoulders had. The air in the chapel felt different with him in it. Not warmer, exactly, but charged, like the second before a storm admits itself. There was a narrow stairway along the left wall leading up to the choir loft. I had not noticed it before. On the landing hung a brass bell rope, old and thick with use. The frayed end brushed the first step. Dante looked at it and went very still, not statue still, worse, the kind of stillness that cost effort. I followed his gaze. "What is it?" "Nothing." Liars usually rushed. Dante never did. He lied like a man setting glass on a table and expecting it not to break. I took one step toward the stairwell anyway. "You don't seem like the chapel type." His jaw tightened. "And you don't seem like the type to ignore an instruction." I should have stopped. I didn't. There was something about the bell rope, about the way his hand had gone white around the lighter without him noticing, that pulled at me. Maybe because fear always interested me more in other people than in myself. Maybe because I had spent so many years being readable that unreadable people felt like dares. Before I reached the landing, another voice came through the doorway. "Boss, I'm begging you to explain why there are armed men by the begonias. It makes the saints judgmental." I turned and found Nico Bellini in the entrance, one hand holding a paper cup of espresso, the other clutching what looked suspiciously like a protein bar. He was handsome in a way that seemed to irritate him. Dark hair, expensive suit, dramatic exhaustion. There was always something slightly rumpled about him, as if life kept interrupting his attempts to look respectable. He saw me and stopped. "Ah, the mystery woman, good. Tell him the schedule is barbaric. Maria has decided I'm retaining water and is punishing me with rabbit food." From somewhere outside, Rosa called, Because you ate tiramisu in your car. Nico lifted his face toward the ceiling. A man is not allowed one private betrayal. Even Dante's mouth shifted, almost against his will. Nico noticed and gasped softly. There, I made the boss nearly smile in a chapel. I expect a plaque. Then the bell rang, not loud. One hard, accidental strike as a draft pushed the rope against the brass above. Dante's expression changed so quickly it felt like watching something crack under ice. The lighter disappeared into his fist. For one bare second, all the blood seemed to leave his face. His eyes fixed on the stairwell as if the sound had opened a door somewhere he had spent years holding shut. He did not move toward it. He looked trapped by it. Nico saw it too. His joking died instantly. Dante, a shot shattered the left window. Glass burst across the pews. Nico swore. Dante moved. He crossed the aisle and hit me low around the waist before my body even understood there was danger. We went down hard behind the front pew. Marble slammed my knee. His hand stayed locked around me. One arm braced over my head as a second shot punched splinters out of the wooden rail above us. Outside, men shouted. Dante did not. He reached inside his coat, drew his gun, and fired once through the broken window without looking reckless or hurried or human enough to be frightened. A body hit the gravel outside. Nico was already at the door, cursing in 3 languages while yanking his own weapon free. I hate holy ambushes, he snapped. It feels disrespectful. Rose's shotgun answered from the path outside. The gunfire lasted less than a minute, long enough to make my lungs forget their job. Long enough for me to realize Dante's chest was pressed hard against mine, his coat cold, the weight of him absolute. Long enough for me to become aware of my own hand gripping the front of his shirt. Then silence came back in pieces. Dante lifted himself first. Stay here. That would have worked better if his hand hadn't slid from my waist to my ankle when I tried to stand too fast. The touch stopped both of us. His palm circled the bone there, firm, warm, bare skin between the hem of my dress and the strap of my shoe. Not possessive, not gentle enough to be innocent either. His gaze dropped to where he held me. The whole chapel seemed to narrow to that single point of contact. Neither of us breathed properly. Then he let go. I stood because not standing would have meant acknowledging too much. My knee stung. A thin line of blood ran where the marble had kissed skin through torn stockings. Dante saw it at once. It's nothing, I said. He looked at me as if deciding whether to believe my definition of nothing. Then he turned toward the side door. Near the entrance, one of his men dragged an intruder inside by the collar, blood marking the stone in dull streaks. The man couldn't have been older than 30. He still held a broken rifle strap in one hand. Dante crouched in front of him. There was no rage in his face. That frightened me more than if he'd been shouting. Who sent you? The man spat blood toward his shoes. Dante did not flinch. You had a clean line on the chapel. That means someone watched the house long enough to know her routine. His voice stayed level. Who told you where she'd be? The man smiled with split lips. Belandi girls always wander back to church. Everything in Dante went still again. That line landed, not because of me, because of something older. He stood. Take him. No threat, no promise. Just 2 words, and the men around him moved like the sentence had already contained the ending. I shouldn't have followed him with my eyes when he turned away, but I did. I saw then the faint scar disappearing beneath his collar, pale against the side of his neck. I saw the way his hand tightened once at the sight of the bell rope again. Not fear, memory. The kind that leaves bruises in places skin never covers. Nico came back in, winded and insulted. 2 dead outside, 1 running, and Rosa is in a mood because apparently I hesitated theatrically. I did not. I merely assessed with style. Rosa appeared behind him, reloading. You ducked behind a statue. It was St. Michael, Nico said defensively. I assumed he'd appreciate teamwork. I laughed then, thin, shocked, wrong for the room. Dante looked at me. There was blood on the floor, glass in the pews, a man being dragged toward the courtyard to an ending I was not brave enough to imagine. And still he looked at me as if the laugh mattered more than the mess around it. When he finally spoke, His voice was quieter than before. No more wandering alone. I wasn't wandering. I was suffocating politely. Nico made a strangled sound that might have been a laugh and might have been a prayer for my survival. Dante came toward me again, stopped just short of touching, then reached past my shoulder instead. His fingers wrapped around the bell rope. He cut it loose with a pocket knife in one clean motion and let the frayed end fall to the floor. Only then did he seem able to breathe. He offered me his hand. I took it. He led me out of the chapel without letting go. The scorched tin arrived the next morning in Tommaso's hands. I knew it before I knew him, not the man, the tin. Green enamel, once glossy, now blackened along one side and warped at the lid where the heat must have caught it. My father kept his sugar thermometers in it when I was small. Later, after he died, I kept other things there because grief teaches people strange rituals. A ration card with his handwriting, 2 train tokens, the tiny silver saint medal from my first communion, and the only recipe notebook he had ever let me touch without slapping my hand away. Tommaso stood in the breakfast room as if he were delivering condolences, not property. He was older than Dante, dark-haired, gone silver at the temples, immaculate in a charcoal suit. The kind of man whose politeness looked expensive because it had been practiced long enough to become dangerous. But his eyes were tired, and when he held the tin out to me, he did it with both hands. "We recovered what we could from the apartment," he said. My fingers shook when I took it. The breakfast room had floor-to-ceiling windows over the south lawn. Morning light hit the polished table in clean white stripes. Dante stood at the far end with a file open in front of him, but his gaze had lifted the second the tin entered the room. Rosa was by the sideboard pouring coffee. Luca Vital, Dante's physician, narrow-faced and dryly amused even at 8 in the morning, leaned against the mantel with his arms crossed. No one spoke while I set the tin on the table and opened it. The saint medal was inside. So were the train tokens and a recipe card written in my father's slanted block script. For one irrational second, relief hit me so hard I had to grip the table. Then I lifted the notebook. The cover had singed at the edges, but the pages inside survived. Flowery fingerprints still marked the corners. My father's writing filled the margins, not just ingredients and temperatures, but corrections, substitutions, tiny notes to himself. Orange rind only if the lemons are tired. Do not trust sugar on wet days. Never leave custard unattended or men either. My breath snagged. Dante came closer without making me feel crowded. "That matters. It's all I have of him." Tommaso's gaze dropped politely to the table. "There was also this." He set down an envelope, cream paper smoke-stained at the edges. I recognized it instantly. My acceptance letter, Boston School of Culinary Arts. I closed my eyes. Luca made a low sound through his teeth. Rosa stopped pouring coffee. No one in the room missed the way Dante's expression altered, only slightly, only enough to sharpen. "You were leaving," he said. I hated how guilty that sounded when he said it. I was trying to. Without telling anyone, I looked up. Who exactly was I supposed to tell? My landlady, the florist downstairs. The Mafia Boss who locked me in a guest room. Rosa's mouth twitched over the coffee pot. Luca looked at the ceiling as if already bored by rich men and their wounded pride. Dante's eyes stayed on mine. "When?" "In 3 weeks." The silence that followed felt oddly intimate, which infuriated me. Tommaso cleared his throat with tact so polished it almost glowed. "If this is a bad time, I can return after lunch and pretend I understand nothing." "No," Dante said. "Yes," I said at the same time. Tommaso, to his credit, looked amused by neither of us. "There is another issue." He slid the notebook slightly with one finger. "Mr. Bellandi's recipes are unusual." Luca pushed away from the mantel. "Unusual how?" Tommaso opened to the middle and turned it toward us. "This pastry cream uses 15 egg yolks for a batch size that should take 8. The sugar weights repeat in patterns. The oven times are inconsistent by exact intervals. At first I assumed he was a genius or mad. My father was both, I said automatically. Luca huffed a laugh. Tommaso nodded once. Possibly. But there are repetitions, same numbers, same names in the margins. 3 saints, feast days underlined for no culinary reason whatsoever. Dante looked at me. He coded something. I stared at the page. The truth landed slowly because it had been sitting in front of me for years disguised as memory. My father taught me recipes like prayers. Repetition. Rhythm, pauses in the same places every time. When I was small, I thought he was being patient. When I grew older, I thought he was trying to make sure I could work if he died. Now suddenly I saw the measurements the way he had once said them aloud. Not flour, not sugar, dates, amounts, addresses. "Oh my God," I whispered. The page blurred for a second. I blinked and forced it back into focus. "These aren't only recipes." Dante did not interrupt. He never did when something mattered. I pointed. "These numbers here, 322, 412, 11:8, they're not bake times." He always grouped them in threes when he wanted me to memorize a phone number. And this, I turned 2 pages. These ingredient initials, almond, rum, orange, not flavoring, Aro Arroyo, no Aaron, no. I looked harder. Arno importing. Tommaso straightened. "One of Vittorio's shell companies from 10 years ago." Luca swore softly. My skin went cold. I turned more pages, faster now, my pulse catching where patterns began to reveal themselves. Sweets coded shipments, savories coded names, holiday breads mapped dates. My father had written a ledger inside dessert. Dante watched me work in complete silence. That unsettled me more than praise might have. Men like him were used to knowing things first. He had not expected this from me. I could feel the surprise in the room like heat. The last page had been torn out. I stopped. Dante saw the exact second I did. "What? The end is missing." Tommaso stepped closer. "Burned." "No," I touched the clean, ragged edge. "Removed." Luca came to my side. "By him. Or for him." No one said which him. The room grew careful. Rosa set down the coffee tray with unusual force. "Then somebody knew what this was before today." That thought sank teeth into the air. Dante took the notebook from me only long enough to study the missing edge, then gave it back without argument. "Who knew you kept this?" "Only me." "Who had access to the apartment?" "My landlord sometimes, Mrs. Rossi once when the sink burst." "That's it," Tommaso said quietly, "and whoever set the fire." A hollow feeling opened under my ribs. Luca reached for the acceptance letter still lying on the table. "I'm more interested in why nobody here knew she had a way out." "I had a way to apply," I said. "That isn't the same as getting out." Dante's gaze shifted to the letter, then to my face. Something passed through his expression too fast to name. Not anger exactly, something rougher, personal. I should have looked away. Instead, I heard myself say, "I didn't tell anyone because wanting a different life felt dangerous enough before I met you." The room went still. That was too much truth. I knew it immediately. So did Dante. He did not answer right away. He reached instead for the coffee Rosa had poured and set it in front of me with his own hand, as if the act of not speaking required something in return. The cup clicked softly against the saucer. His ring made the smallest sound against porcelain. Almost. Later that afternoon, because I could not stand one more room full of men staring at numbers and death, I went into the kitchen and made dessert. Not to feed anyone. To make my hands remember a world that obeyed heat and timing instead of power. I baked a bitter chocolate tart with blood orange cream and a shell of burnt sugar on top. When Nico wandered in and asked what it was called, I said, "Something that looks hard because it can't afford not to." He went suspiciously quiet. An hour later, I found Dante alone in his office, staring at the city with the dessert plate half empty beside him. He didn't look surprised to see me. "One of mine is talking," he said before I could speak. I leaned against the doorframe. "Because of the notebook, because only 4 people knew where you were this morning." The burnished dusk light caught the cut scar at his temple. He looked exhausted in a way that made him seem younger and much more dangerous. Men like Dante were safest when rested. Tired men made costlier choices. "Do you trust Tommaso?" I asked. A pause. "I trust what he's been to me." That was not the same as yes. He looked at the plate, then back at me. The sugar shell shattered before the cream did. I blinked. What? You're tart. His voice was unreadable. It was the wrong order. I should have laughed. Instead, my throat tightened, because he had understood it, because I had not meant him to. Because a man who could break a body in 4 seconds had noticed the architecture of my dessert and what it implied about what I thought I was hiding. I folded my arms too tightly. Maybe I made it wrong. No, he said quietly, you didn't. There was a knock at the office door. One of his men entered, pale-faced. Boss, the bank box on Mulberry Street. Cleared out 20 minutes before our people arrived. Dante didn't move, neither did I. The man swallowed. No signs of forced entry. Whoever got there first had the key code. Dante's gaze came back to me, calm as deep water. There's a rat in my house, he said. We went to the bakery at dusk because daylight had stopped pretending to protect anyone. It was not my bakery, not really. Not anymore. My father had rented the back kitchen of a narrow old shop on Grand Street for 2 years after my mother died, long enough to teach me puff pastry and fear in equal measure. The front had sold wedding cakes and amaretti cookies to families who never asked why the owner changed names every 6 months. Now the shutters were down, the windows papered over, the sign stripped bare. But when Dante showed me the coded page Tommaso reconstructed from the notebook, one address, one proofing time, one phrase written in my father's hand. Leave it where bread rises. I knew exactly where to take him. Under the proofing drawer, I said. Dante looked at me. You're sure? My father hid tip money there because he thought priests and thieves both ignored bread. Nico, in the front seat, muttered, This city was built by suspicious Italians. Rosa. Driving said, and sustained by worse ones. I sat in the back beside Dante, the recovered notebook on my lap. The car smelled of leather, cold air, and the faint medicinal trace of Luca's travel kit from the trunk. Dante had insisted Luca stay at the house. Luca had called him a controlling bastard and been overruled. The city moved past the window in wet gold streaks. I could feel Dante beside me without looking, the stillness of him. The deliberate way he sat with one hand on his thigh, as if every part of him had been taught not to betray urgency. Only his lighter moved. Click, close, click. The sound steadied me now. That frightened me too. Stop doing that, I said softly. He glanced down at the lighter and closed it. Sorry. It was the first time I had ever heard him apologize for anything. I looked at his profile in the dim car light and nearly forgot how to breathe. The bakery was colder inside than the street outside. Dust muted the checkerboard floor. Rust streaked the sinks. The old deck oven sat against the back wall like a sleeping animal. When I stepped into the kitchen, memory hit so hard I had to grip the prep table. My father here at midnight, forearms white with flour. My father humming under his breath while sugar browned. My father looking over his shoulder before saying my name. Dante saw the shift in me but didn't speak. He only moved to stand half a step closer without touching. I crossed to the oven, crouched, and slid my fingers under the lowest proofing drawer. Nothing. For one terrible second, panic rose. Then I felt the loosened bolt. Here, Nico shone his flashlight over my shoulder. If a rat jumps out, I'm resigning. From what? Rosa asked. Everything. I twisted the bolt, shoved the drawer hard left, and heard the hidden panel release with a dull wooden thud. Inside sat a narrow oilskin packet wrapped in butcher paper gone yellow with age. No one moved. I drew it out slowly. The first page I unfolded held names, dates, cash routes. Judges, unions, shipments, bribes. Under all of it in my father's hand. If Belandi fails, give this to Salvatore. Not Vittorio, never Vittorio. Dante went absolutely still. My pulse slammed once against my ribs. My father knew you, I whispered. He knew my father, Dante said, voice rougher than I had heard it before. And he knew enough to be afraid of my uncle. Uncle, not rival, not business enemy, blood. The floor seemed to tilt. So many things suddenly made a different kind of sense. The old wound behind Dante's eyes, whenever Vittorio's name entered a room, the care with which everyone else avoided the subject. The way power around him, felt inherited and despised in equal measure. Nico took the ledger pages with unusual gentleness. "Boss, we need to move." Too late, the back door burst inward. Everything after that happened at the speed of instinct. Dante shoved me flat behind the prep table just as the first shots tore through the hanging racks. Metal screamed. Flour exploded white from split sacks, turning the air ghost pale. Rosa fired back from the doorway. Nico cursed with offended intensity as glass rained from the office window. I saw one of the gunmen coming through the side corridor and shouted without thinking, "Steam line!" Dante looked once. The old oven's pressure valve sat exposed along the wall, rusted but connected. My father used to curse it every winter because the pipe screamed before it burst. I grabbed the iron wheel and wrenched. It stuck. Dante crossed the room in 2 strides, covered my hand with his, and turned hard. Boiling steam blew across the corridor in a shrieking white cloud. The gunman went down screaming. Then Dante was gone from my side. I had seen him violent before. This was different, not because he was louder, because he was. He moved through the bakery with terrible purpose, every shot exact, every choice made a fraction before it was needed. One man reached for me over the prep table, and Dante broke his wrist before I fully understood the distance between us had closed. Another lifted a knife and never finished the motion. Blood hit the tiles in dark fans. I saw the full extent of what he was then, not a monster, something more difficult. A man who had turned brutality into competence because incompetence got people buried. A final shot cracked from the office doorway. Dante jerked. Time slowed enough for me to see the bloom of red through his shirt near his ribs. "Dante!" He dropped the shooter with one return shot and braced one hand on the prep table. Rosa was already on the phone calling in cleanup in a voice cold enough to frost glass. Nico, white-faced and bleeding from the forearm, kept watch at the shattered front door. I got to Dante before anyone could stop me. "It's not deep," he said. "That's a stupid thing to say to a person who can see blood." He looked down at me, and even then, even wounded, something almost like wonder crossed his face. We didn't go back to the main house. Luca would have killed him for that decision, which was probably why Dante made it. Instead, Rosa drove us to a safe house above an unused wine warehouse near the river, and Nico, clutching his arm and his dignity in equal measures, declared from the passenger seat, "If I survive tonight, I'm asking Rosa to marry me out of spite." "You survive this," Rosa said, eyes on the road, "and I may shoot you myself." He sighed dreamily. Chemistry. The safe house had bare brick walls, one long couch, a narrow kitchen, and a bathroom with a medicine cabinet stocked by people who expected trouble often and guests never. Dante sat on a wooden chair under a single yellow lamp while I cleaned the blood from his side. The bullet had gone through clean. Lucky, if anything about it could be called that. He watched my hands. That was worse than the wound. I pressed gauze to the exit wound and he hissed once through his teeth. "Sorry," I whispered. "For what?" "Hurt." His gaze stayed on me. "You were the first person who ever did that." I looked up. "What?" His eyes dropped to my hands where they moved over blood with all the care in the world. "In the restaurant. You wiped blood off me before you asked whether I'd hurt you. You didn't flatter it. You didn't freeze. You just tended to it." A pause. "No one in my world does that." The room went very quiet. Somewhere far below us, a truck rolled over wet street grates. The lamp buzzed. My own pulse felt too loud. "That's why," he said, but it sounded like he hadn't meant to say it out loud. I tied off the bandage because my fingers needed something to do. "That's a terrible reason to fixate on someone." A faint, pained smile touched his mouth. "I know." He should have looked invincible, bandaged and blood-marked under that weak light. Instead, he looked tired, human in a way that made him more dangerous to me than ever. I set the scissors down. "Dante!" He stood too quickly for a wounded man and then stopped himself, one hand braced on the table between us. We were close, painfully close. I could smell whiskey on his breath from the swallow Rosa had forced into him in the car, and beneath it, cedar and smoke, and the iron scent of blood that stubbornly remained. His hand came up, halted beside my face and fell away again. First restraint. Don't, he said roughly. Don't what? Ask for something I can't survive giving you. That should have frightened me into silence. Instead, I heard my own voice come out small and honest. Then don't be kind to me unless you mean it. Something in him broke, not control, the last lie under it. He touched my face with both hands as if I were the fragile thing now. His forehead lowered to mine. He stayed there for one unbearable second, breathing me in, giving me time to move. I didn't. His mouth brushed mine once. Barely. And almost so gentle it hurt worse than if he'd taken more. Then he pulled back, second restraint. I grabbed his sleeve. He looked at my hand, then at me. I don't know what this is, I whispered. But if you stop now, I'll think I imagined it. His eyes closed. When he kissed me the second time, he did not hurry. He kissed me like a man walking toward a fire he had already decided was worth the burn. Slow, careful, devastating in exactly the places I had kept unguarded because I had not known they were doors. I felt the tremor he hid when my fingers touched the back of his neck. Third restraint lasted one heartbeat, then he gave in just enough. When we finally parted, the room was altered beyond repair. Dante rested his forehead against mine, breathing hard but controlled, as if control was now something he had to build again by hand. War, he said quietly. This is war now. Below us, the city kept moving. Nothing would ever go back. Luca Greco died with my hand in his. The marble floor of the downstairs corridor had gone slick under my knees, cold even through my stockings, and his blood looked too dark against it. Not movie red. Not dramatic. Just thick and blackening at the edges, while armed men thundered past the open archway, and somebody shouted in Italian for more ammunition. Luca had always smelled faintly like antiseptic and clove cigarettes. That night, beneath the metal stink of blood, I could still smell both. Elena! His fingers tightened once around mine. Listen to me. I'm listening. My voice shook so badly the words hardly counted. He gave me the ghost of a smile. No, you're not. You're panicking politely. A laugh tore out of me and broke in the middle. Luca had done that to me from the day Dante brought me into that house, made me laugh when I wanted to come apart. He'd been Dante's physician, yes, but also his cleaner, his reluctant conscience, the man who carried extra reading glasses in his suit pocket and scolded killers for skipping stitches. With me, he'd been unexpectedly gentle. He taught me how to load a pistol without pinching my palm. He showed me where the cameras didn't reach in the East Garden if I needed to cry unseen. 3 nights ago, he'd stood in my kitchen while I glazed pear tarts and said, in the driest tone imaginable, "You know the boss is in love with you, don't you?" before asking for another tart. Now there was blood at the corner of his mouth. "Stop talking," I whispered. "Please stop talking, I can fix." "You can't," he coughed, eyes squeezing shut. "And if you lie to me now, I'll haunt you out of principle." Gunfire cracked somewhere above us, not random, controlled, efficient, Dante. I looked up before I meant to, toward the sound of it, and that was my mistake. Because in that one stupid glance, I saw the truth whole. Men weren't breaking into his world anymore. War had arrived inside it. Luca felt the shift in me. "There's a passport in my inside pocket. Ticket 2. Nico has a car waiting 2 blocks east." He swallowed hard. "Boston, little baker. Culinary school, fresh name, clean life." My head snapped back down. "What? I found the acceptance letter in your room 2 weeks ago and decided to commit a privacy violation in the service of your future. You had no right." "No." Another terrible half-smile. "But I was right anyway." My throat closed. I had applied before Dante, before the house, before I knew what his silence could do to a room and what it could do to me. I had almost forgotten I'd done it, which felt like a crime against the girl who once believed powdered sugar and laminated dough could be enough of a life. Luca's fingers slipped in mine. "Go," I shook my head so hard my hair stuck to my lips. "Elena," his voice sharpened with the last of his strength. "If you stay knowing what this is. No fantasies, no excuses. No more pretending the danger belongs to him and not to anyone who stands close enough to touch him." I thought of Dante in the library 3 nights earlier, jacket off. Shoulder bleeding through his shirt, while I stitched him in silence. He'd watched my hands and stopped himself from touching me 3 separate times. I knew because I felt each restraint like a held breath in the room. At the end, when I'd tied the final knot, he had lifted his gaze to mine and said softly, "When the cup nearly fell in the restaurant, everybody else reached for a gun or a door. You reached for something breakable." His mouth had gone tight after that. "That was the first mistake I made with you, little ghost. I noticed." He'd admitted it like a confession, like a wound. Now men were dying because he had noticed. Luca's breath hitched. "Go while you still can." The corridor shook with footsteps. Rosa appeared first, gray hair half fallen from its knot, shotgun braced against her shoulder like she'd been born with it there. "Car's ready," she said. Her voice broke only on the second word. She looked at Luca once, then away. That hurt more than if she'd cried. Behind her, Nico Bellini limped into view, one hand pressed to his side. "For the record," he announced to nobody sane enough to care, "I have been shot on an evening when I specifically planned to eat pasta." "Do you understand the injustice?" Even then, a wet laugh escaped me. Nico pointed at me. "See, I'm a healer, move." Luca exhaled, satisfied. "There," she laughed. "Now get her out." I bent over him because I couldn't not. "Thank you," I whispered, and there were 1,000 things inside it. For the pistol lesson, for the tart. For treating me like I was not delicate just because I was frightened. His eyes found mine one last time. "Make it a life you can bear." Then his hand went slack. I don't remember standing. I remember Rosa taking my face between both palms. I remember the roughness of her skin and the click of safety coming off the shotgun in Nico's trembling hand. I remember, most of all, the precise metallic tap from the far end of the corridor, Dante's signet ring striking the butt of his gun once. A habit I had learned meant somebody was about to die. The sound followed me all the way to the car. Chicago blurred past in black glass and sodium streetlight. Nico drove one-handed, muttering prayers, insults, and calorie counts under his breath. "If I survive this," he said, turning too fast onto Halstead, "I'm eating bread in front of Rosa and letting her think less of me. That's how serious the trauma is." I stared at the envelope in my lap. Boston, a new name, a clean life, ovens instead of guns, burned scars from sugar work instead of powder residue on my wrists. At Union Station, Nico stopped the car and didn't look at me. "If you go, I'll tell him I forced you. You can't lie to Dante." "No, but I can die trying." Inside. The station was all echo and old stone, and tired people pulling suitcases toward ordinary futures. Mine sat in my hand in the shape of a ticket. I made it as far as the platform. The train hissed. Doors opened. Somewhere a child cried because he was sleepy and small, and the world had not ended for him tonight. I took out the acceptance letter. My own name stared back at me from the top. Elena Morty. The name that had made Dante go still in that restaurant. The name Vittorio Carbone had been hunting because my father had hidden numbers in recipe books and died before he could tell anyone where the last page was. The name that had cost Luca his life tonight. I could leave. That was the terrible part. Nobody was dragging me back. Nobody had locked the door from the outside. I could get on that train and spend the rest of my life making things that rose in the heat instead of lives that fell apart under it. I thought of Dante's face when he was quietest. Not cruel. Not even hard then, just lonely in a way that made the room around him seem accidental. I thought of Luca saying no fantasies. I tore the ticket clean through the middle. Then I tore the letter. By the time I got back in Nico's car, my hands had stopped shaking. He looked once at the scraps in my fist and sighed like a man who had just lost an argument with fate. "I'm going to need more than pasta." When he pulled into the courtyard, the house was lit like judgment. Men moved in and out with rifles. Somebody hosed blood from the front steps. Dante stood in the war room with his back to the door, shoulders squared over the city map spread across the table. His jacket was gone. Blood marked one cuff. Every man in the room kept a careful distance from him, as if rage had temperature and he was giving off too much of it. His ring tapped the edge of the table once. Everyone turned when I entered. He didn't, not immediately. Then he did. His face changed by less than an inch. It wrecked me anyway. I told Bellini to get you out, he said. He did. Then why are you here? Because leaving felt like sawing off a living part of myself. Because Luca had died telling me not to lie to myself, and this was the first true thing I had done all night. I put the torn ticket on the map between us. I'm not leaving. Luca was buried under rain. Not a storm, nothing dramatic enough to match the hole his absence made. Just a slow gray drizzle that darkened the black shoulders of suits and turned the cemetery paths to slick ribbons of mud. The priest spoke in Latin and English. Rosa stood straight-backed beneath a dark umbrella and never once wiped her face. Nico wore a bandage under his collar and whispered, at inappropriate volume, "If I die before 40, tell everyone it was stress and not cured meat." I would have smiled if I hadn't felt hollowed out. Dante stood one row ahead of me, bareheaded in the rain. Water tracked down the side of his face and disappeared beneath his collar. He did not move. Men like him learned very young how to go still enough that grief mistook them for stone. I knew better now. The first handful of dirt hit the casket with a sound I felt in my teeth. Afterward, people drifted toward cars and engines and obligations. Rosa pressed a packet of biscotti into my hand because she loved through food or not at all. Nico got into a whispered fight with a cousin over whether funeral pastries counted as a cheat day. The world kept being embarrassingly alive. Tommaso Salvator found me by the old chapel. He'd been in Dante's shadow since I arrived in that house, older than Dante by 5 years, quieter, always immaculate. He handled the parts of the empire that wore ties instead of holsters, contracts, banks, judges who preferred cash folded inside prayer books. He had been kind to me in the careful way of a man who didn't trust kindness, but offered it anyway. He once brought me lemons from a market 2 neighborhoods over because Rosa mentioned I liked to candy the peels. Now he stood beneath the chapel awning, rain silvering his dark hair at the temples. "There's something you need to see," he said. The packet of biscotti crackled in my grip. "What? About your father?" His gaze flicked past me toward the line of black sedans. "Not here." Every instinct I had sharpened in the past 6 weeks rose at once. Dante had taught me the first rule of his world without meaning to. When a man offered information at the wrong time, the time was the information. Still, my father's name landed where caution lived and made it weaker. "What about him?" Tommaso hesitated. "The orphanage records weren't all destroyed. I found a ledger box in the chapel basement when we bought this property years ago. Your name was inside it. I should have gone to Dante. I know that. I knew it even then. But grief makes fools of people who are otherwise careful. And some part of me, the same part that had spent a childhood inventing my father from scraps, wanted one thing untouched by bullets. One clean answer, one truth nobody could shoot holes through, so I followed him. The chapel smelled like wet stone and extinguished candles. My heels clicked once on the tile, and then the sound changed as we reached the narrow back stairs, becoming duller, trapped. The basement was colder than the rain outside. Shelves lined the walls. Old hymnals, moldering boxes, a rusted radiator. Tommaso stepped in first and turned. There was a gun in his hand. For one full second, my mind refused the shape of it. Then the door shut behind me. "I'm sorry," he said. The world became unnaturally clear. The wet hem of my dress against my calves. The beeswax smell from an overturned box of church candles. The scrape in Tommaso's voice on the second syllable of sorry. "You brought me here alone," I said, because my body had abandoned every useful sentence and left me with the obvious. "Yes, you could have shot me outside." His mouth tightened. "I'm trying not to." Another voice answered from the dark corner behind the shelves. That has always been Tommaso's problem. He mistakes delay for mercy. Vittorio Carbone stepped into the light like a memory that had learned how to wear skin. He was older than Dante by 20 years, silver at the temples, expensive coat buttoned despite the damp. Not handsome in the easy way. Worse. Compelling in the way certain dangerous men were compelling, because the people around them arranged themselves like debris around a blade. I had seen photographs. I had heard his name in rooms that went quiet after. Dante never spoke it unless necessary. Vittorio smiled at me with a kind of patience I hated on sight. Elena Morty. Your father wasted a great deal of everyone's time. My heartbeat settled instead of racing. Terror, I had learned, sometimes came out so sharp it became calm. What do you want? The last page. I said nothing. He nodded as if I had confirmed something. Good, Dante likes women with spines. It makes his eventual suffering more educational. Tommaso flinched. I turned toward him then because I needed to see it with my own eyes. Why? His face altered, not enough to save him, enough to wound me. My son has cystic fibrosis, he said quietly. Vittorio has the doctors in Zurich, the trial treatment. He told me if I delivered the page and kept Dante blind for 48 hours, Matteo got a chance to live. Somewhere very far away, rain tapped the chapel windows. Gray villain, gray world. That was the cruelty of it. Tommaso had not sold us out for greed. He had done it for a child who coughed blood into monogrammed towels. My anger stayed. It just lost the comfort of simplicity. Vittorio sighed. You hear that, Elena? This is why Dante will lose. He keeps men with hearts. He walked closer. Your father hid numbers in recipes. Clever. Flour measurements masking accounts, oven temperatures covering dates, cream weights standing in for names. We found most of it, not the last page. He gave it to someone before he died. He already knew, or thought he did. My recipe tin sat in the false back of my wardrobe under 6 folded sweaters, unless a cold realization slid through me. Tommaso knew the house. Tommaso knew every room in it. I met his eyes. You searched my things. He looked away. In that moment, more than the gun, more than Vittorio's smile, betrayal became real. Not because Tommaso had chosen against us, because he had entered my room, my tiny borrowed piece of safety, and turned my life over with careful hands. Vittorio lifted a folding chair with his foot. Sit, I remained standing, his expression cooled. That was not a request. A gunshot cracked above us. Not here, outside, farther off. Vittorio smiled slowly. Ah, there he is. My pulse stumbled. Dante had noticed. He always noticed. Vittorio leaned close enough that I caught his cologne beneath the rain, bergamot, cedar, something metallic underneath. Here is the choice, child. You tell me where the page is, and Dante dies quickly. You stay loyal, and I let him watch his house burn around him first. The worst part was that he believed this was an intelligent bargain. I let my fear rise just enough to wet my eyes. Then I said the truest, dangerous thing I had learned from Dante. No. For the first time, Vittorio looked genuinely interested. Above us, another shot. Then 3 in quick succession. Tommaso turned toward the stairwell, and somewhere beyond the basement door, very faint but unmistakable, I heard a hard metallic tap. Signet ring against steel. Dante was inside the chapel. Tommaso heard it too. His face went white. Vittorio's smile vanished. Hold her. Tommaso reached for me. I drove the packet of biscotti into his eyes and ran. The packet bought me 3 seconds. Not more. Enough. Tommaso cursed and staggered back, one hand over his face. I hit the shelves at full speed, sending hymnals and candle boxes crashing into the narrow aisle. Beeswax rolled underfoot. Vittorio swore. Somebody fired and the shot exploded plaster from the wall beside my head. I took the back stairs 2 at a time. The chapel above had turned into noise and smoke. One pew was splintered. Stained glass saints stared down through drifting gunpowder haze like they had seen too much human blood to be impressed by more of it. A body lay near the altar, face down, dark suit, unfamiliar shoes. Rain lashed the open side door in silver sheets. Little ghost! Dante's voice did not rise often. Hearing it cut through the gunfire was like hearing a church bell in the middle of a riot. I turned toward it just as a man lunged from behind the confessional. His hand caught my arm. Instinct, Luca's lessons, not courage, took over. I slammed my heel down on his instep, twisted the way Luca showed me, and drove my elbow into his throat. He let go, gagging. I ran again. Outside, the cemetery had become a battlefield laid over the dead. Men moved between tombstones, muzzle flashes stuttering white in the rain. Dante stood halfway down the path, one hand bloody, the other steady on his gun. He wore no coat. Rain had pasted his shirt to his shoulders. He looked less like a man than the idea of one right before judgment. His eyes found me. Everything in him changed, not softened, worse, focused. Then Vittorio's men poured out the side entrance behind me. Dante fired twice without looking anywhere but at my face. Both men dropped. I made it 3 more steps before somebody caught my hair from behind so hard my neck snapped back. Pain burst white behind my eyes. A forearm locked around my throat. Gun barrel at my temple. Breath sour with coffee and adrenaline. "Drop it," the man shouted. The whole path froze. Rain struck marble. Somewhere off to my left, Nico yelled, "I hate outdoor violence." "It's damp." Even then, absurdly, it helped. The world stayed human 1 second longer. The man behind me dragged me backward toward the side lane. "Drop it or she dies." Dante did not lower the gun. My heartbeat became a hammer against the arm crushing my throat. He was too far. He could not shoot clean. He knew it. I knew it. Vittorio stepped out under the chapel awning, unhurried, as if he were late to dinner instead of mid-betrayal. Tommaso came after him, blood at one eyebrow, grief written across his face so openly it almost looked like repentance. "You see," Vittorio called through the rain. "This is what loving something does. It narrows excellent men." Dante's expression did not change. His ring tapped once against the gun grip. My captor tightened his hold. Then I remembered the church candle in my pocket. I had grabbed it blindly from the basement shelf when I ran. One thick votive wrapped in paper. Worthless, I had thought. Dead weight. Now I crushed it backward in my fist and drove the jagged waxed edge into the man's eye. He screamed. His grip broke. I dropped straight down the way Luca drilled into me until bruises made the movement automatic. The shot meant for my head snapped through rain above my shoulder. Dante moved. Later, I would remember almost nothing clearly except the speed. Not wild, not frantic, terrible because it was precise. 2 strides, 1 shot. A second man falling before he realized he'd been targeted. Dante reaching me while the first body was still dropping. His hand locked around the back of my neck. Not hard, absolute. He looked at my throat, my face, the blood in my hair that wasn't mine. And for one fractured instant, the restraint I loved in him broke clean through. I saw exactly what he was capable of and exactly what it cost him to keep it leashed around me. "Are you hit?" I tried to answer, coughed instead. His forehead touched mine. 1 second. Rain, breath, gunpowder, the whole cemetery gone thin around the pressure of that single contact. Behind us, bullets cracked again. The moment ended because moments did that. He turned me into the lee of a stone angel and put his body between mine and the path. "Stay down. Dante, stay down." It should have sounded harsh. It landed like fear. From somewhere to our right, Nico appeared crouched behind a mausoleum. Suit ruined, tie crooked, blood seeping through the bandage at his ribs. "I would like the record to show," he shouted while reloading, "that I am too pretty for this much recurring trauma." A woman's voice from the cars answered, "You were never pretty, Bellini." Rosa. Of course, Nico actually brightened. "Rosa spoke to me in public. This may still be my day." Despite everything, a shaky laugh escaped me. Dante heard it. I knew because his shoulders loosened by less than an inch. Then Tommaso stepped into the open with empty hands. "Dante," he called. Every gun on our side turned toward him. Rain ran off his jaw. "Matteo is 7. He can't breathe without machines some nights." Dante's gaze stayed flat. "And you sold my house for oxygen." Tommaso swallowed. "I know what I did." Vittorio had vanished in the confusion. That was the kind of man he was. He let other people stand in the center of the consequences. Tommaso looked at me then, and whatever he saw there stripped him of the last lie he had been telling himself. "He's going to the river warehouses," he said. "Pier 42. The books, the cash routes, all of it. He wants to burn the old accounts and start a war he can profit from." Nico hissed through his teeth. "He gave us directions after kidnapping the boss's girl." "Bold strategy." Tommaso ignored him. "If you go now, you can still stop him." Dante said nothing for so long the rain itself seemed to lean in. Finally, take him. Two men moved. Tommaso did not resist. Dante knelt in front of me again. His thumb brushed the bruised skin under my jaw with infuriating care for a man covered in blood. Little ghost. It was different that time. Still possession, no longer cold. I thought you told me to stay down, I managed. His mouth almost moved, not quite a smile, something more private and therefore worse for me. And you still don't listen. I should have said something light, something sensible. Instead, I caught his wrist before he could stand. The rain softened around us. Or maybe the rest of the world just receded. You came anyway, I whispered. Something bleak and tender crossed his face. Always. That was as close to a declaration as either of us had. He stood then and pulled me with him, not behind him, but beside him for one impossible second, before tucking me back under Rosa's arm. The choice said more than the words. He trusted me to stand. He did not trust the world to deserve it. By the time we reached the cars, the bruise on my throat had begun to bloom. Nico opened the back door for me with a pained flourish. If we all survive the river, I'm proposing to Rosa. Rosa didn't look up from checking the magazine in her shotgun. Do that and I'll bury you myself. Nico sighed, dreamier than the threat deserved. You hear that? Chemistry. Dante slid into the seat across from me, wet, silent, lethal. Pier 42 waited in the dark. One of us was not coming back unchanged. The river smelled like rust and diesel and old sins. By the time we reached Pier 42, the rain had thinned to a cold mist that turned the warehouse lights grainy at the edges. Barges sat low in the black water. Forklifts slept in rows like blunt-nosed animals. Beyond the chain-link fence, Lake Michigan breathed in the dark. Dante's men spread out in disciplined silence. No bravado, no shouted orders. That was one of the first things I learned about real violence. The closer it got, the quieter men became. I stayed in the secondary car with Rosa and Nico while Dante studied the warehouse through binoculars. Tommaso, wrists zip-tied, sat under guard 2 vehicles back. His information had gotten us here. It had not purchased forgiveness. Nico shifted and winced. I'd like to note, he whispered, that being heroic on a gunshot wound is terrible for the core. Rosa handed him a protein bar without looking at him. Eat! He stared at it with genuine despair. After all this prison food in wrapper form, I should have been too frightened to smile. Somehow the smile came anyway. Then I saw the trucks, bakery trucks, white panels, faded gold lettering. Salvatore Hospitality Supply. My stomach dropped. What? Dante asked without turning. I pushed open the car door before Rosa could stop me. Those aren't the usual delivery trucks. Every male head within 20 feet pivoted toward me, old reflex. Men in his world were not used to being interrupted by women, and definitely not in the middle of a harbor siege. I kept going because being embarrassed in front of armed criminals had lost some novelty. The rear axles are riding too low for flour and sugar, and if they were carrying semolina, you de-smell it. It dusts sweet, warm, these smell like oil. Dante lowered the binoculars. I walked closer to the fence, breathing through the cold. And the left truck is venting wrong. Flour sweats in damp air. That's not flour, I looked at him. He's moving weapons in your food line. For the first time that night, surprise cracked clean across his face. The trucks weren't just transport, they were insult. Corruption. Vittorio was taking the one clean empire Dante had been trying to build on top of the dirty one. Restaurants, hotels, shipments with actual invoices, and gutting it from the inside. He's using your legitimate books to start a dirty war, I said. If those trucks make it out, every clean account becomes evidence. Dante was already moving. Bellini, take Team 2 around the loading dock. Rosa, with me. Nico clutched his side. I knew loving a woman who disrespects carbohydrates would kill me. Rosa shoved past him. Move. Dante caught my wrist before I could follow. The contact burned. You stay in the car. No. His gaze dropped to the bruises on my throat, then came back up colder. Elena, he knows I can read the code. If this goes wrong, he won't stop coming. I'm already in it. For a second, anger flashed, not at me, at the truth. Then he nodded once. At my back. That one concession felt bigger than every locked door he had ever opened for me. We breached through the side-loading entrance. The warehouse interior was cavernous, lined with stacked pallets and dangling industrial lamps that buzzed over the damp concrete. One of the bakery trucks stood open under the fluorescence. Inside, rifles packed in flour sacks, ammunition crates labeled imported olive oil. I tasted bitterness at the back of my throat. Gunfire erupted from the catwalk above. Chaos split the room. Men dove for cover. Glass shattered somewhere high to my left. Dante shoved me behind a steel column and returned fire with vicious economy, each shot deliberate. Rosa moved like a woman 30 years younger and twice as angry. Nico, from somewhere near the forklifts, shouted, "If I die ugly, tell my mother it was quick." We gained ground in bursts. Then Vittorio stepped onto the central catwalk. He held a detonator in one hand. Of course he did. "You should have let her leave," he called to Dante, voice carrying easily in the hollow space. "Now she gets to watch what you are." Dante stepped out just enough to be seen. "You first." No monologue, no pleading, just that. Vittorio smiled. "You think you are different from me because you hesitate where I wouldn't, because you love more carefully. But look at this place. Look at your men. Look at the girl." His eyes cut to me. "Everything near you becomes collateral." The words hit because they were shaped like Dante's deepest fear. I looked at Dante then. He did not look back, not because he didn't want to. Because if he did, Vittorio would see where to aim. That was when I noticed the second line. Wires. Thin, nearly invisible, running from the catwalk supports down into the truck bed. Not to the truck Vittorio stood above, to the one nearest the river door. "If he drops the catwalk, the dock blows," I said, too low for anyone but Dante. His ring tapped once against his gun. He had heard. "What?" Rosa barked. "The venting truck," I said faster. "It's the bomb, not the catwalk." Vittorio's gaze sharpened. He read the shift in us and pressed the detonator. Dante fired at the exact same second I moved. I don't know if courage was involved. I think I was simply the closest one to the forklift. I slammed the lever forward. The machine lurched into the bomb truck broadside just as the detonator triggered. The explosion tore sideways instead of through the center. Heat punched the air from my lungs. Metal screamed. Concrete cracked. The truck blew through the open bay doors and into the river in a blossom of white fire and black water. I hit the ground hard enough to see stars. For a few seconds there was nothing. No sound, no shape, just a high-ringing whine. Then Dante was over me. His mouth was moving. I couldn't hear him yet. His hands moved over my arms, shoulders, face, checking, counting, confirming. When sound rushed back, the first word I caught was my name. "Elena!" "I'm here," I croaked. Relief hit his face so nakedly it felt private. A shot cracked above us. Dante turned and saw Vittorio still standing on the half-collapsed catwalk, blood down one sleeve, gun raised. What happened next would live in me forever. Dante climbed, not like a hero, like a verdict. They met on the twisted metal halfway up. No speeches, no audience-worthy hatred. Just two men who had spent years circling the same ruin, finally occupying it together. Vittorio went for the wound under Dante's ribs. Dante took the hit, trapped his wrist, and drove him backward into the railing. "Look at you," Vittorio breathed. "You became me after all." Dante's face hardened into something I had never seen and would never forget. "No," he did not shoot him in rage. He put the gun down. And with his bare hands, Dante broke the man who had built him wrong. The catwalk gave way under Vittorio's falling weight. He disappeared into smoke and steel, and the dark water beyond the dock with a sound too final to be anything but ending. When Dante came down, he was limping. Blood soaked his side. His eyes were empty in the frightening way, not dead, not gone, simply carrying the cost of what he had just chosen. Sirens wailed in the distance, too late to matter. Behind us, one of the restrained guards dragged Tommaso forward. He had seen the whole thing. "Matteo?" Tommaso asked, voice already broken. Nico lowered his gun a fraction. "The clinic transfer went through an hour ago. Boss authorized it before the cemetery." Tommaso stared. Dante hadn't told him. Mercy in Dante's world was always done in secret. Tommaso folded where he stood. I went to Dante because not going to him had become impossible in every language that mattered. His hand found the back of my neck as if it belonged there. The harbor burned behind us. He closed his eyes for 1 second. Then he opened them and said the only words either of us could carry. It was over. War ended messily. Nobody tells you that when the shooting stops, paperwork begins. Condolence calls, quiet funerals, accounts frozen and unfrozen. Men who had called themselves loyal suddenly remembering doctors' appointments in other states. Reporters sniffing around the edges of businesses that could not afford scandal. Grief made administrative. 3 months after the harbor, the house was quieter in all the wrong places. Luca's reading glasses still sat in the library drawer where he left them. Rosa refused to move them. Tommaso was alive, but gone, sent with his son to Zurich under terms only Dante understood and nobody else questioned. Vittorio's disappearance became a rumor, which in our world was a kind of grave marker. And Dante survived his wound because the universe was not cruel enough to teach me hope and take it back in 1 season. I moved into the East Wing without anybody formally discussing it. That was how things happened in his house. One day my clothes were in the guest room. The next, Rosa was annoyed by the distance to Dante's rooms and started putting my folded laundry in his dressing room by accident. After that, no one pretended anything. Not that it turned us into something soft overnight. He still stopped himself, even after the harbor. Even after the night, I woke from a nightmare and found him sitting on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, one hand wrapped around mine as if he had been there for hours. Even after the first real kiss in the dark kitchen at 2 in the morning. When I had flour on my cheek, and he had bloodless exhaustion under his eyes, and he kissed me like breaking something sacred and choosing not to. He still stopped. That was how I knew what I meant to him. On Sunday afternoons, I took over the downstairs kitchen and baked enough to feed the entire household, whether they deserved it or not. It was the one place in the house where my hands never shook. Butter listened, sugar obeyed, dough rewarded patience and punished panic. There was mercy in that. That afternoon, I was glazing orange polenta cake when Nico wandered in wearing sunglasses indoors and carrying a bouquet that looked stolen from a funeral. "For Rosa," he said dramatically. I stared. "Why are the flowers upside down? So the good side faces her first. That isn't how flowers work. It is when a man has been rejected 7 times and is experimenting with surprise." I laughed. Before I could help it. Nico pointed a warning finger. "You laugh now, but when I'm dead of romantic humiliation, I'm haunting everyone selectively." Rosa entered behind him with a bowl of lemons and stopped dead. Her gaze moved from Nico to the flowers to me and back. "Why are you dressed like a divorced magician?" Nico straightened. "Because today, Rosa Ferrero, I come to you not as a wounded soldier or misunderstood nutrition enthusiast, but as a man of intention." Rosa set the lemons down with elaborate patience. "If you're about to kneel, I'll kick you." He froze. "You knew. I'm not blind, just unlucky." To my complete delight, Nico went pink. Dante chose that moment to walk in. He had abandoned ties since the harbor except when absolutely necessary, as though nearly dying had earned him the right to breathe. His shirt sleeves were rolled. The scar at his side still pulled his movements tighter than before. He smelled like cold air and cedar, and the espresso he drank too late in the day. At the sight of the flowers, one dark brow lifted. Nico spread his arms. "Boss, witness my courage." Dante glanced at Rosa. "Do you want him removed?" Rosa considered. "Not yet," Nico clutched his heart. "There is hope." "There is a delay," Rosa corrected. He looked at me as if I, somehow, was the authority on women. "Are those the same?" "Not remotely." Dante's mouth shifted, that almost smile, the private one. After Rosa finally accepted the flowers with the air of a queen, accepting a surrender she had not requested, Nico left the kitchen, floating a full inch above the floor. "She touched the stems," he whispered to me on his way out. "This is practically an engagement." "Bellini," Dante said without looking up from the espresso machine. Yes, boss. Go away, warmly acknowledged. When the kitchen settled, only the tick of the old clock and the quiet hiss of the espresso machine remained. Dante leaned one hip against the counter, watching me finish the glaze. You're staring, I said. I know. My pulse did its usual unreasonable thing. He held out a cup. I filled it. His ring tapped the porcelain once before he lifted it, and the familiar sound crossed the room softer now than it had in the beginning. Less warning, more presence. I met with the school in Boston, he said. The spoon slipped from my fingers and clinked into the glaze bowl. What? They held your place. I turned too quickly, nearly hitting the counter with my hip. Why would you? Because you should still have a choice. There it was. The thing fairy tales never understood. Love from a man like Dante would never look like freedom from consequences. It looked like being offered the door even when it would gut him to watch you walk through it. My throat tightened. Do you want me to go? His gaze rested on me, unreadable to anyone else. Not to me anymore. No, the honesty of it nearly hurt. Then why? Because wanting is not enough. He set the cup down carefully. Because if you stay with me, little ghost, it cannot be because I made every other life impossible. Silence spread, warm, terrifying. I wiped my hands on a towel that didn't need it. I already chose. I know. He reached into his pocket and put a small velvet box on the flour-dusted table between us. Not dramatic, not kneeling, not a performance. I'm asking if you choose again. For one wild second, I could only stare. The ring inside was old-fashioned and unmistakably worn, the kind of piece that had belonged to a woman who lived through hard things and kept her hands busy while doing it. Not a glittering princess stone, a family ring, real, weighty. My mother, he said. She married my father knowing exactly what he was. She regretted many things. Never him. I put my fingertips on the box because touching him felt too dangerous. Dante, this is not a fairy tale. His voice had gone very quiet. There will be days you hate what my name costs. Nights you wait up, parts of me I can't cut out and hand you clean. A beat. But if you stand beside me, you'll never stand there alone. My eyes burned. I hated crying when I felt too much. It made me feel 12 and helpless and transparent. I don't know how to answer beautifully, I whispered. Something in his face gentled all the way. Then answer honestly. So I did. I think, I said, because that was as brave as I knew how to be. I was supposed to want a safe life more than I wanted a true one, and I don't. He closed his eyes once, opened them. Elena, yes. The word landed between us and changed the room. He didn't move at first. Neither did I. The old clock ticked. Outside, somebody laughed in the courtyard. The cake cooled on the rack. Then he stepped forward, slid the ring onto my finger, and bowed his head until his forehead rested against mine. Little ghost, he said, and for the first time it sounded like home. The kettle began to whistle. 9 months later, the house smelled like espresso, oranges, and a baby who had just discovered he possessed lungs. Our son objected to mourning as a concept. Mateo, I whispered desperately, bouncing him against my shoulder while dawn silvered the kitchen windows. If you love me at all, even a little, you will close your eyes. He did not. He had Dante's stare already. This felt unfair to me personally. From the doorway, Nico, now officially engaged, to the astonishment of every saint in every church, watched with smug delight while eating contraband cannoli. You mocked me for years, he informed the baby. Remember this when I teach you to annoy your mother professionally. Rosa, who had become a fiancée without surrendering 1 ounce of menace, slapped the back of his head as she passed. Don't corrupt him before breakfast. Nico rubbed the spot and sighed at me. See the abuse I endure for love, tell the boy. Mateo blinked solemnly and then began to howl harder. Traitor, Nico said to him. I was laughing by the time Dante came in. He had our son's second bottle warming in one hand and the morning paper tucked under his arm. Married life had not made him less dangerous. It had made the danger quieter, more precise, folded into ordinary things. He could sign away a man's empire before noon, and then come home to warm formula with the same steady hands. The contradiction no longer frightened me the way it used to. Some days it still haunted me. That was the unresolved thread, I suppose. Love did not erase the shape of the world we lived in. It only made me willing to look at it without pretending it was something else. Dante took one look at Matteo, then at me, and his mouth shifted. Not a smile, never just that. A private surrender to tenderness he still handled as if it might bruise. "Give him here." Gladly. He took the baby with the skill of a man who had practiced in secret until he trusted himself not to break what he loved. Matteo quieted almost immediately, furious on principle, calmer in fact. I narrowed my eyes. This is favoritism. Dante glanced down at the small dark head tucked under his chin. He has discernment. Nico clutched his chest. Boss joke before coffee, historic day. Bellini, Dante said. I know, go away. But Rosa likes me better when I leave voluntarily. From the stove, Rosa said, that is not why, he brightened. She spoke. Marriage remains viable. He disappeared toward the pantry, humming under his breath. I heard him mutter something about starting a father's union against emotional neglect. Rosa rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might stay that way. The kitchen had become the center of our life in a way I never could have predicted from that first blood-slick night. Not the grand dining room, not Dante's office. Here, where dough rose, where news arrived over cut fruit and coffee. Where men came in carrying holsters and left with biscotti and napkins because Rosa insisted, and I had learned to insist beside her. I turned back to the counter to pour my tea one-handed. Matteo made a sudden grab toward the cup from Dante's arms, astonishing reach for someone with no balance and 3 teeth, and the saucer tipped near the edge. Before it could fall, I caught it. 2 fingers around the handle, thumb steadying the rim, one clean movement. The kitchen went still, not everyone in it, just Dante. For a second, all I heard was the tiny porcelain click as the cup settled safely back into its saucer. That sound. The first night I met him, in the restaurant I thought was just another place to earn tips, a gun had appeared at a table 3 feet away. Men swore. A chair crashed. Espresso spilled. And while everybody else lunged for the exits or the weapons or the nearest lie, I had reached out and caught the cup before it shattered. Then I gave him my last name. He had told me in the library, months before, why it mattered. You reached for something breakable before you reached for yourself. No one in my world does that. His eyes had stayed on the stitches in his shoulder while he said it. I didn't know what to do with a woman who still protected fragile things. Now, 9 months after the harbor. With our son against his chest, and morning light on the table, and flour still dusting the hem of my robe from dough I'd started before dawn, he looked at me the exact same way. Only this time, he let me see it fully. Rosa, bless her, took Nico by the tie from the pantry entrance and hauled him back out without a word. He made a scandalized noise that ended in a muffled, delighted, "She touched the tie, I'm counting it." Then it was just us. Me, Dante. Matteo between us, blinking at the world like he had filed a complaint against it. Dante crossed the kitchen slowly. The bottle sat forgotten on the counter. He shifted Matteo to one arm and touched the saucer with his free hand, as if verifying the reality of it. Then his ring tapped the porcelain once. The same sound as chapter 1 of my life with him. Not a warning now, a vow. His gaze lifted to mine. You still do it. I could have played ignorant. Earlier in my life I would have, but marriage to Dante Salvator had ruined me for easy evasions. Catch falling things, protect them, his voice dropped, even when no one protects you first. Something in my chest opened and ached. I put my hand over his on the saucer. You do now. The look that crossed his face was too raw for words. Good thing words had never been the best thing between us. He bent and kissed me, soft because the baby was there, devastating because the baby was there, because this was what all the almosts had become. Not less. More. Love settled into the body. Love making coffee. Love carrying scars without hiding them. Love waking before dawn because somebody's small needed warmth. When he drew back, Matteo made an indignant sound at being excluded. We both laughed into the same breath. Jealous already, I whispered. Good, Dante said gravely to our son. It's hereditary. Later, after breakfast, after Nico ate 3 cannoli in secret and Rosa pretended not to know. After the guards rotated, and the city woke and the darker machinery of our world began its daily grind beyond the kitchen walls, Dante found me at the back steps with Matteo asleep in my arms. The garden was green. The air smelled of basil and cut grass and distant rain, ordinary enough to feel revolutionary. He sat beside me, shoulder against shoulder. For a while, neither of us spoke. That was another thing the story changed in me. I no longer mistook silence for emptiness. With Dante, silence was often where the truest things lived. At last he said, "Do you ever regret it? Not the marriage, not the ring, the larger thing, choosing him, choosing the dark with open eyes, choosing the life that had Luca's absence stitched into it. Rosa's watchfulness, Nico's absurd loyalty, blood under the floorboards of a home that still smelled like bread on Sundays." I looked down at Matteo sleeping against my chest, one tiny fist tucked under his cheek. "Yes," I said at last, because lying to him had never survived us for long. "I regret what it cost." My fingers smoothed over our son's soft dark hair. "I regret that he'll grow up learning caution before innocence is finished with him. I regret every grave your name put in my life." I lifted my eyes to Dante S., "But I have never once regretted you." He went very still. The wind shifted through the basil beds. Somewhere beyond the garden wall, a siren moved down another street, belonging to somebody else's disaster. Matteo slept on, warm and impossibly heavy with trust. Dante reached into his pocket and took out the silver lighter. For a second, I only stared at it. The same lighter. The same soft metallic click that had frozen a restaurant, changed my life, and taught me the sound danger made when it entered a room without asking permission. He flicked it once. Click. But this time, he used it to light the small glass candle on the top step. The one Rosa insisted kept mosquitoes away, and Nico claimed made the garden smell, like rich people repenting. A quiet flame bloomed gold between us. The sound that had once meant fear now meant evening, home, and my husband beside me in the fading light. Dante looked at the candle, then at me. "The first night I heard your voice, I thought your name would ruin what was left of me. And now," his hand came up to cup the back of my neck. Warm and cert, and reverent in a way that still undid me. "Now I know it saved the part of me worth keeping." My eyes burned at once. I let them. He leaned in and kissed my forehead first, then my mouth, gentle because Matteo was between us, and because tenderness had become the fiercest thing he knew how to offer in daylight. When he drew back, his thumb traced the corner of my jaw. "Little ghost," he said softly, and the name held none of its old coldness. Only history, only love. "You still reach for what's fragile." I smiled through the ache in my throat. "So do you." He looked down at our son and gave a low huff of something almost like wonder. "I'm learning. That more than anything was the miracle of us. Not that Dante Salvator became harmless, not that I turned fearless. Only that, in a world built on power and punishment, we had made something ordinary enough to feel impossible. A child asleep, a candle lit against evening, bread cooling in the kitchen. And 2 people who knew exactly what darkness cost, and chose each other anyway. The city beyond our walls would never become safe. We both knew that. Our son might one day ask questions I could not answer gently. There would always be ghosts at our table, but there was this, too. His shoulder against mine, the candle flame trembling in the dusk, the soft weight of Matteo in my arms, the silver lighter cooling in Dante's hand after the click. And for the first time in my life, I did not feel like something being hidden. I felt chosen. The lighter clicked and it meant home. Would you have chosen Dante, knowing his love would cost blood, grief, and the loss of an easier life, or would you have walked away while the door was still open? When I chose him, did I do the right thing?